Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Have a seat, grab a cold one, and get ready to enjoy the show. We have a good one in store, the Sports Audio Report. Sports audio is such a huge part of sports fandom, and that translates to effective advertising. Joining me today to tell that story are Melissa Paris and Jen Sock. Hi, Melissa. Hey, Jen. Thanks for participating today.
Thanks for having us.
Of course. You both have a lot of valuable wisdom to add to this report. Why don't you go ahead and tell the viewers about yourselves and what your favorite sports are or your favorite sports teams?
Sure. So I'm Melissa Paris, and I'm Vice President of Sales Research at SiriusXM Media. I grew up in a household that had sports on in the background constantly. My dad and my brothers are huge fans of basically every sport. So we're a Yankees family, but I myself am more of a casual sports fan in general. But I do have a more niche sports obsession, and that is the world of professional running. So I am super excited for the Summer Olympics this year, and especially for the women's marathon.
That's great. That's awesome. And you do a lot of long distance running?
I'm fairly new to it, but for the past 6 months, I've gotten very, very obsessed with running. So I'm working my way up to that distance.
Nice. Well, shout out to you because I can only do sprints on the soccer field. That's about it.
Thank you.
And Jen, what about yourself? What kind of sports do
Hi.
you like?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm Jen Sock. I run our channel solutions team. So I'm the executive director of a bunch of areas, including DR print, local, audio, and addressable. And sports wise, I also grew up in a New York family. So it was all about the Giants and anything. And for my father, it was rooting against the Yankees, whoever played against the Yankees. So that makes me a lifelong Yankees fan. So I could constantly compete against him. So a lot of New York sports, but a lot of time spent on college basketball and football and a bunch of others. And I am a forever Lehigh fan. So going to enjoy that one forever.
Jen, I thought we were friends until you exposed yourself and said you were a Giants fan.
Fair enough.
I s-
We're a divided family of Jets and Giants, so it's a tough one around here.
yeah. For those wondering who I am, my name is Gabriel Soto, and I'm a senior director at Edison Research. My favorite sport to play is football, aka soccer. I grew up in the Philly area, so that's why I have this natural animosity to Giants fans, except for Jen today. So by default, my favorite teams are include the Eagles, the Sixers. My alma mater is Rutgers University. I'm a Scarlet Knights fan all the way in all sports. Now it's your turn, viewers. In the chat function via Zoom, tell us who you are. And don't forget to send it to everyone in the settings, not just panelists. We love to learn more about you and what you think throughout the report in the chat function. Don't forget to add your favorite sports teams. We seriously need to know the answer to that question so we can identify the Dallas Cowboys fans so Jen and I can kick you guys out. Just kidding. Everyone is welcome here, and you are also welcome to ask any questions about the report in the Q&A function. We do have folks from Edison Research, SiriusXM Media, and Group M who are ready to answer any questions you may have. Again, that's in the Q&A function. Now, we're extremely excited about this report. Melissa, why don't you let the people know what we're going to cover in today's webinar?
Okay, so today we're going to cover sports fandom in general. We're going to start by just sizing up how big of a passion point sports are for Americans, and we'll segment how that fandom breaks down by interest level. And then we'll get into sports audio and what role that content plays for sports fans. And then finally, we will tackle sports audio advertising to showcase what opportunities await brands in that space.
So viewers, you should also know this report yielded so much data that we'll be doing a series of webinars to cover it all. In the second part of this series on July 16th, we'll cover sports fans who are women and women's sports. Stay tuned until the end of this one to register for that one. Jen, Melissa, and I are proud of the countless insights this report has generated, and this is how we conducted it. In Q4 of 2023, we collected over 3,500 online interviews of Americans older than 13 who identified as sports fans. Now, we'll get back to what that means in a second, but all data were calibrated and weighted to match gender, age, and ethnicity of sports fans, according to our share of year study. These methods allowed us to explore fandom in the United States, and this is what we found. Sports is a wide-reaching pastime. So we know that 2/3 of the American population, or 186 million, identify as sports fans. That's someone who self-reports a 4 or higher on a 10-point scale, where 1 means not at all a fan and 10 means a super fan. They are the subject of the remainder of this webinar. They have a lot of passion, and there are many things that drive that passion. Like many of you, the majority of fans use sports to keep their family ties strong. 68% of fans say it brings their family closer together. This gets passed down generation after generation, and I'm no exception. So Jen, I think the person that really influenced me in my sports passions was my dad, right? When he first came to this country, I think he found a lot of passion with Philadelphia fans. He's from Mexico. I gotta tell you, Mexican fans, when it comes to soccer, are just as crazy as Philly fans, and I think he was able to, find pride in all of that. He's taught me the chants, the ruthless ones, and the innocent ones as well. And I really, bonded with him. He worked a lot during the week. He worked 2 jobs, and during the weekend was the time where I spent the most time with him watching soccer, even watching American sports that we both got into together.
Same, right? It's all about family in this one for me. So I think there's 2 sides for me. From my mother's side, it is all about swimming. My uncle was an Olympic swimmer. My mother is a synchronized swimmer.
Oh.
And my kids now are starting to get into this passion as well and thinking about swim teams. So I am an Olympics diehard by far. But I also want to say that from my dad's perspective, it is all about the Syracuse Orangemen. My dad grew up with Boeheim. They went to school together. They look like each other. They have similar mannerisms. So staying up all night with my dad, watching the 2003 NCAA Men's Division I championship was one of the highlights. It's one of those times you just will always remember.
I love those stories. And we also know that the majority of fans follow sports for reasons that are really related to family ties. So about 2/3 of sports fans say that following a sports team or athlete helps them connect with others, and that it gives them a sense of community to really just be a part of something bigger.
Yeah, and there are other reasons why people listen. There are a lot of fans who have a strong preference for athletes' lives beyond the field, particularly younger fans. The majority of Gen Z and millennials follow the personal lives of athletes they like or follow beyond their sports careers. Jen and Melissa, I think the media is clearly a factor here, right? It has to be. So I'm a millennial raised alongside the rise in sports coverage. Premier League coverage in the UK was in its infancy in the 90s. Even just soccer in the US was in its infancy. I remember my dad telling me about the days in the 90s where they played the game, they showed it on TV, and in between, live during the game, they would show a commercial, whether it was the 33rd minute or the 20th minute, just because they didn't really know how to advertise, or they needed the money to show soccer in the US. So whether you missed a goal during the commercial, you missed it. That was it. You couldn't go back and watch it. But stars like Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant, they were also, became more accessible on a global scale because of television during those days. And now there's social media and podcasting. The situation was a lot different for boomers back in the day.
Yeah, I think today's sports fans are so lucky. We have unprecedented access to athletes' personal lives, and we can really understand kind of like their motivations and what drives them. So just as a personal example here, I mean, I get so much motivation, so many valuable tips just by listening to interview podcasts with pro runners. I really feel like I actually know many of them personally just by how much they share about themselves and their personal lives. And the great thing about media like podcasts is that they cover virtually every sport, every team, from the smallest to the most mainstream. And that brings us to our next question from the study, which is, what are the most popular sports or leagues in the US? Now, you may have guessed the NFL, and if you did, you would be correct. This was a multi-select question, so respondents could pick multiple sports or leagues that they're fans of, because of course many fans do follow multiple sports or leagues. But we saw far and away at number one, 59% of sports fans indicating that they are big fans in the NFL and they follow it closely. And then we see that college football, the NBA, the MLB, and college basketball round out the top 5 most closely followed sports or leagues. Now, these might look small compared to the bigger leagues, but 10% are big fans of Formula One and 13% for tennis or golf. And that equates to nearly 20 million sports fans who are big fans of these sports. So these are still actually big numbers. And note that this slide does not include the more casual fans that might still follow these sports or leagues, but just less closely. So probably the hottest topic in sports this year has been women's sports, and that's thanks in large part to Caitlin Clark, of course. And within this study, we did see that women's sports are on the rise among sports fans. So just about a third of sports fans overall currently follow any women's sports team or female athlete. And about 3 in 10 said that they're following female athletes more now compared to what they did 5 years ago. So Jen, we would love to hear your perspective just on how Group M is approaching women's sports now.
Yeah, absolutely. Group M is committed to doubling our media investment for annual women's sports with the creation of a dedicated marketplace. We're seeking first looks and first to market opportunities and beginning with the 24-25 upfront alongside advertisers including Adidas, Ally, Coinbase, Discover, Google, Mars, Nationwide, Unilever, Universal Pictures, among many others. We are a firm believer in this area and growth potential.
Love that. That's amazing.
That's incredible. That's a great announcement, Jen, and thank you for making that announcement during this webinar. Sports among women and women's sports in general are on a rise. Melissa, you mentioned Caitlin Clark, other athletes like Serena Williams, Simone Biles, Megan Rapinoe are all at the forefront, of this movement. And we want to cover that in, again, the next webinar in this series, which will occur on July 16th. So stay tuned to register for that webinar when this one ends. Again, that will be on July 16th. In the meantime, let's separate casual spectators from the diehards. We know there are levels to this, and here are 3 different groups with 3 different levels of passion. Those who selected 4 to 7 on a 10-point scale of sports fandom are what we call casual. The 8s and 9s are the enthusiastic fans, and anyone who said 10, the max here, are the diehards. We know that more than half of Americans identify as casual or enthusiastic fans, while 15% identify as diehard. Whether we feel heartbroken, whether our team loses a close Super Bowl, or whether we go wild when we witness the closest thing to a miracle, like the miracle on ice, miracle on the Meadowlands, whether we place ourselves on one of these categories, all ties back to sports media. Without it, there would be no fans. And looking specifically at audio, we know that there's loads of evidence that audio plays an integral role in sports fandom. A strong 64% of sports fans frequently or occasionally listened to sports content throughout the last year via audio. That's radio, podcasts, or SiriusXM. For comparison, 89% of fans do the same with sports video. And that's the problem for audio. It often gets overshadowed by what we see on TV or streaming. And we can't blame fans, right? We need to watch our game live. We like to see the faces of our favorite sports athlete, but we do also know that the evolving sports audio landscape shapes the way that fans see that video content, the way that fans see the sports world, especially for the diehard fans. And there are 3 major platforms that make up the ad-supported sports audio landscape. More than half of fans frequently or occasionally listened to sports content on AM/FM radio, over the air, or online throughout the year. A third say the same about podcasts, and a quarter turned to SiriusXM radio at the same rate for sports content. Sports audio listeners are different types of beasts. Our research confirms what many of us have been thinking for years. Sports audio listeners are more likely to be diehard fans. Here's a breakdown of sports video viewers and consumers of different sports audio. Note the die-hard fans in green here are better represented among sports, SiriusXM, podcast, and radio listeners when compared to sports video consumers. Melissa, do you get do you sense this level of fandom at SiriusXM?
Absolutely, Abe. I think it definitely tracks that SiriusXM sports listeners are more likely to be diehard fans. Sirius just provides so much in-depth coverage across sports and leagues, and these fans just cannot get enough content. They're turning to it wherever they can, and they're turning to Sirius to really get that exclusive coverage that they can't find elsewhere. And there's definitely this sense of connection that they develop, both with their favorite hosts or personalities and with other listeners of their favorite channels. Now, we already established that this is one of the reasons why people like sports in general. It's for that sense of community, and that sentiment also drives their listening. So 58% of sports audio listeners say that they listen to be a part of a community of fans. And another majority say that they listen to feel more connected with their friends, their family, or their colleagues. So the more you might know about Aaron Judge's contract negotiations or Simone Biles' triumphant return to gymnastics, the better that water cooler conversation is really going to be. And community also means more co-listening. And that means there's more exposure to sports audio content that might not be reflected in standard listening metrics. So the vast majority of sports audio listeners say that they listen at least some of the time with other people. Sports podcast listeners and SiriusXM sports listeners are even more likely to co-listen. And actually, the majority of fans who are SiriusXM listeners said that they listen with others most or all the time. And that does make sense. You think about SiriusXM's strength in the car. The car is just, where co-listening is a natural behavior. And Gabe, we've actually seen this play out in other research studies we've done with your team on co-listening in recent years as well.
For sure. Yeah, we have tons of evidence that SiriusXM listening, podcast listening, and radio listening is further reaching than what most people think. I think people have this picture of a person listening to audio on their headphones on their own, but they forget about the in-car and at-home environment where people are listening to their favorite audio content and they're exposing it to their families, members, and their friends. And I think when it comes to sports listening, here's another factor. Sports listeners spend more time with audio, so they have more chances to listen with others. Looking at research outside of the sports audio survey, daily sports listeners in the United States, according to Edison's Share of Ear quarterly study, spend an average of 2 more hours than the general population listening to audio each day. Now that adds up if you can imagine weekly or even monthly consumption out of this. Sports listeners have always been strong audio consumers, but the way they listen has changed in the last 5 to 6 years. Now, while the majority of sports audio still comes from AM/FM radio each day, podcast share has just about doubled since 2018. Younger sports audio consumers are driving that momentum. 13 to 34-year-olds spend more of their sports audio time with podcasts than radio at an eye-popping 3-to-1 ratio. While radio is still the majority of time, 35-year-olds and older spend with sports audio. Now, Jen, I've heard that many advertisers find sports podcasts as a good entry point into the medium. Many brands are familiar with the sports media through radio, TV, and other places. How do you feel about that? Is that true?
Yeah, sports is a great way to bring people into podcasts. From exactly everything you're saying, want a little bit more, want a little bit of information about the personalities or a little bit about the sports. My kids have introduced me to podcast as a way to get better in their sports. I have 2 children that are mogul skiers, freestyle team, and they listen to, moguls with Ben Chapman or other ways to get better at the sports that they're doing, soccer sports, field hockey sports, depending on the different area. It's a great way to jump in, and then people like SiriusXM then provide opportunities for here's other types of podcasts you might like. So I'm finding them going deeper and deeper into the various sports that they like.
And what kind of shows are your kids listening to on podcasts?
I mean, everything. So, Moguls of Ben Chapman, as I said, is a really fantastic opportunity for them to see more. But anything around for my daughter, the U.S. women's team, she jumps all over those to learn more about the athletes and gets excited every time that they're going up. I mean, we do a lot of watching the Gotham team. It's just over here in the Jersey area. And that is really a fantastic way, too, to get into understanding what some of the younger sports people are doing. How do they make these teams? How do they continue to move up in the lines? And that's something that I'm loving watching them understand as they do sports.
So just about half of sports audio listeners say that they listen to sports audio to hear unique perspectives on sports that are not covered in other media. But look at that podcasting number. Among those who listen to sports podcasts, 74% say the same. And long gone are the days when current athletes had to wait for retirement to start a career in sports commentating. So today, the likes of Jason and Travis Kelce, you may have seen them in the news this year. You might know a little bit about Travis's relationship status. So the Kelce brothers, LeBron James, these athletes are playing out their sports careers by day, and then they're spending their nights in front of the mic. And that's giving us really fresh perspectives directly from the locker room. And then we see former players like Shannon Sharp, Pat McAfee, Dale Earnhardt Jr., and even prominent journalists like Stephen A. Smith. All of them are finding success through podcasts.
Yeah, and you gave a specific shout out to the Kelsey brothers. That's, Melissa, one of the more popular stories from nearly 1 year ago to quarter 1 of this year. So quarter 2 of last year to quarter 1 of this year, the show has climbed more than 100 ranks to break through the top 5 biggest podcasts in terms of audience size in the United States. That's according to our Edison podcast metrics study. They deserve an award for that because that's incredibly difficult to do, but they, couldn't have done it without Taylor. You alluded to that in your last statistic, and we've been tracking the show's growth pretty closely. We've seen how the impact that Travis's and Taylor's public relationship has had. Again, that will be covered in more detail in the second webinar of the sports audio series. New Heights is a good example of how successful a sports show can be, but you don't need to be a Super Bowl champion or Taylor Swift to start your own. There's demand for all kinds of viewpoints. Here's an opportunity alert. A sizable 40% of sports audio listeners say there aren't enough audio programs that cover the sports they like or follow. Another 40% say there aren't enough that give different perspectives. Jen, I think these two statistics capture the existing strong demand for sports audio.
It does, Gabe. And you know what? I think I'm going to be watching for in the Olympics time frame. Do you know there's 4 new sports that they're adding into the 2024 Olympics? So I know for me, I'm going to be looking for things like sports climbing, surfing, breaking. I need to find out what that is, and skateboarding, right? Like, I mean, how great would that be to kind of watch a new skateboard, listen to a new skateboarding podcast and really understand what's going on with these guys? How exciting to be the first entrance of a new sport.
For sure. And a lot of people listen to podcasts for that type of information, right? To learn new things, to follow their favorite teams, and to get things explained to them. I remember I had to tune into podcasts to learn about the NBA play-in tournament format that they started a couple of years ago. So it was, it was very helpful to have audio content like that.
Gabe, during the Olympics in 2010, I listened to so many different things. I could tell you everything about the curling athletes. I just love them. I mean, the fact that one was pregnant, I was pregnant with twins at the time. I watched them incessantly. I could tell you everything about all the different teams. When you get really into a sport like this is the kind of thing you're looking for, to really learn more about them and try to understand it. Even when I went to be a ski jumper, I was convinced I could go train
Wow.
Lake Placid. I was all over trying to learn anything about these athletes and their lifestyles to see if it was something I could be part of. And I think, as you said before, that's what the new generations are doing. Can I be part of this? Can I learn something more about them just to follow in their footsteps? And this is a great way to do it.
For sure. And I think this also translates to effective advertising. All of these reasons why people listen. You see the results in that in the advertising and consumers' sentiment towards advertising that we captured here in this section of the report. Here's what we found on sports audio advertising. So we know that sports audio consumers take action. from gathering more information and using promotional codes or that they heard on sports audio content. 3/4 of listeners have ever engaged in any of these behaviors that you see on this list. So athletes should also take note here. Audio consumers are more receptive to your advertisements, to athlete advertisements, than sports video consumers. For example, 81% of podcast listeners say they like hearing their favorite athletes on ads versus 69% of sports video viewers. Now, Jen, is an athlete advertisement, how do you see that play out on your end in the branded advertising world, the ads that people hear from their favorite athletes or endorsements on podcasts or different types of audio?
There's no doubt on podcasts that we find some great success when we have host read ads that are part of the experience. That makes things pop a little bit more for the consumers listening. So I think we hope to get even more athletes that are willing to work with brands and help us to integrate into their programs seamlessly.
Gotcha. When you get an MVP on there, it helps that brand go further, that ad go further.
Yeah, real personalized experience makes a big difference.
For sure. Now, speaking of MVPs, podcasting is the MVP when it comes to purchase intent of athlete advertised products. At least according to this statistic, 68% of sports podcast consumers are more likely to buy a product or service if it were advertised by an athlete they like or follow, versus 48% of sports video viewers who say the same.
And we also see that about 2 in 3 sports audio listeners trust the products and services that are used by their favorite athletes. And this trustworthiness really carries through to other sports personalities. So personalities like announcers or commentators, 64% of sports audio listeners say they trust the products that they use. So I think this shows the power of advertising in sports audio content in general, whether that content is hosted by an athlete themselves or by another trusted sports audio expert. And as we established earlier, sports audio reaches diehard fans, and that ties into more spending on merchandise. Sports audio consumers spend an average of $262 each year on sports merch or memorabilia, and we see sports podcast listeners outspending them at an average of $321 every year. Now compare that to sports video viewers. They spend an average of just $185 per year. So we can very clearly see that fans who turn to audio outspend other types of sports fans. And audio listeners also boast characteristics that appeal to advertisers. So looking first at employment, we see that about half of sports video viewers are employed part or full-time, but 69% of both podcast and SiriusXM listeners are currently employed. They are also more likely to have a college degree. And we see sports podcasts and SiriusXM listeners are more likely than sports video viewers to have an annual household income of $100,000 or more.
And as more and more states legalize online sports betting, sports books have brought more and more revenue into sports media. These brands should know how effective these audio sources are in reaching the consumers who get involved in monetary wagers for sports. For example, SiriusXM adult sports listeners are twice as likely to participate in fantasy sports than sports video viewers. SiriusXM's 21-year-old consumers, or anyone that's older than 21, are nearly twice as likely to bet on an online sports book than sports viewers. Audience, stay tuned because we have one more stat for you. But to close things off and wrap it up here, we want to share with you a quick recap on the webinar. We covered today that sports is a wide-reaching pastime in the United States. It's largely affected by sports audio, and we know that many die-hard fans listen to sports audio when compared to sports video consumers. And we also know that the reasons why people listen to sports audio content and enjoy sports leads to effective audio advertisement. And we know the reason why people listen to sports or listen to sports audio content and follow sports leads to effective sports audio advertising. Melissa and Jen, so thank you again for joining me today. I just want to ask you what you think you want this audience to take away from this webinar, from this report, and the insights that you've gathered while working on this?
Yeah, I would love for everyone to just remember that if you want to reach the most engaged sports fans, those who are really ready to spend and those who are really receptive to ads, don't sleep on sports audio.
I think on my side, the biggest takeaway for me is the fact that audio is such an important medium that works alongside the video sports budgets. I think if you can get with the right podcasts and get with the right hosts, your message will be received so well with the audiences and should really be considered as a reach extender when it comes to sports advertising.
So just to amplify that a little bit, what both of you said, I think this idea that many people, many sports fans think that sports is, more than just a game. And the way to measure that was with this statistic, that nearly 1 in 4 of sports fans have cried because of an outcome of a sporting event they watched or listened to. Another quarter say that they come close to crying. I don't know about you two, but I think I fit into that 26%. I've come close to crying. I've never cried. I've been heartbroken. It does feel like a breakup when your team loses a very close game. I do think the one thing that could get to me is not tears of despair, but more tears of joy. Seeing my dad's favorite team win the World Cup, the Mexican national team. And that for me would be the greatest sight in the world. He's 80 years old. His time is running out. He has signs of dementia, but to see it happen and, be perhaps at the 2026 World Cup, to see it live would be amazing. Chances are it won't, but I think that's the one thing that would move me from that 26% to that 23%.
I have witnessed the 23%, right? In the most famous game of our life, for my team was the Lehigh versus Duke men's basketball in 2012, heading into the tourney. And I was having people over, some Dukies, some Lehigh folks in the room. And as we won, and no one thought we were going to win, I watched a few tears being shed by the Duke folks that year. So that was a really good year for me. And I'm not sad to see the 23% cry after that.
So thank you everyone for joining us today. We talked about sports fandom, sports audio, and sports advertising. We hope that many of these statistics and insights and wisdom that Melissa and Jen shared today will help you advocate for yourselves, advocate for other creators, and advocate for the sports world. Thank you again for joining us, Melissa and Jen. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure having you and sharing, some of my stories, but also hearing your stories of the sports world. There's a lot of unique stories out there that are meant to be shared. So thank you.
Agreed. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Of course. A big shout out to SiriusXM and Group M for sponsoring this research. A public report will be available on edisonresearch.com. Thanks to them. Another big shout out to the team over at Edison Research. This also wouldn't have been possible without you. It truly takes a coordinated effort to conduct a study like this one. And there's a lot of work that goes into each data point and text box and picture that you see in these reports. So thank you again to the team over at Edison Research. All right, everyone, thank you for sticking with us. You can scan this QR code to register for the next webinar in the Sports Audio Report series. We'll be covering, again, women's sports fans and fans who are women. We'll be taking a look at what drives them, how they behave in terms of the sports audio world and sports audio consumption, among other things. Thank you again for joining us.